Welcome to the Melbourne Property Pulse. I'm your host, John Scarpa, and today I'm delighted to have in the studio with me Murray Wallace from New Home Shop. Murray is the director and co-founder of New Home Shop, which is a one-stop location for those looking for a new home, located in the central suburb of Caroline Springs in the west. New Home Shop are expert in the Western region, which is currently undergoing a significant boom in all types of housing projects. Murray and I have just come from our breakfast meeting at Otto Lane, which is a local cafe here in the Cheltenham region, and we're suitably caffeinated and ready to have a discussion about all things real estate. Murray, welcome to the podcast. The first thing I wanted to ask you about, Murray, is what attracted you to the western suburbs and why you think there's been such phenomenal growth in this region?
John, I'm a Western boy. I grew up in Altona, and that's where I know and love the people, love the culture. And as I grew, I got to know a bit more about Melbourne. I experienced the eastern suburbs, and it soon became apparent that there was an opportunity in the west based on its proximity to the CBD. So the eastern suburbs, if we're talking about outer suburbs, in the east, they're 40, 50 kilometres out. Yes. In the west, because of delayed development, they're still only 20 to 25 kilometres away from the CBD. CBD location is very attractive. It has the amenity, and so there's got to be an area of opportunity in bringing people close to the CBD, and that's what the West offers.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously you've seen a lot of changes from when you grew up there to current times, a lot more population.
John, when the places that we're building now,
yes.
You went out there rabbit shooting, looking for bunnies. There was nothing there. You never ever thought that there would be anything there. Now, it's a world of opportunity with great capital growth. Thousands of people are flooding in every year, and it's realising its potential that it's always had.
Yes.
I think back in the days when Melbourne was just a settlement, the west was a swampland.
Yes.
The east had rivers, it had rolling hills, it had the sorts of things that you needed when you're a fledgling society to get going.
Yes.
The west didn't have that.
Yeah.
Consequently, it's been delayed. It tended to be industrial for a long time.
Yes.
To a certain extent, it still is, but that's changing. And more families, and particularly those who are immigrating into Melbourne, finding themselves in communal situations. Culturally, there's a lot of Indians, there's a lot of people from the subcontinent and other places that are settling in and finding themselves as part of true communities in varying parts of the western and northern suburbs.
Yeah, and if you take Caroline Springs, for example, where your head office is located, that has become a little micro city in itself. I was quite amazed when I came out to visit you there, how it really has changed from, say 10, 15 years ago.
Absolutely. When it was founded probably 20 years ago, it seemed to be on a limb out in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
To drive through Caroline Springs now, you come across lakes, you come across very modern and dynamic business centres, cafe culture, restaurants, the whole thing, and surrounded by lovely homes. It is an amazing place. If you've never been to Caroline Springs and you've only ever heard of it, go out there and get a surprise. You'll really be surprised.
Absolutely. And obviously as Caroline Springs has started to fill up, the development has been extending outwards a little bit. What are the other regions or other suburbs in that region that are starting to take off?
There's Caroline Springs borders an area called Plumpton. And what was Plumpton generally only a couple of years ago has now been divided into 8 different localities with names like Fraser Rise. They are individual little suburbs, and it's testament to the fact that the area has grown up so quickly. Thousands of homes infilled, and will keep going. So other areas that would be surprising would be Rockbank. Rockbank was a nothing very recently. Now it is a vibrant location with many land developments, and very soon it will be just suburbia in the same way we recognise it anywhere else.
Wow.
Melton, the development of Plumpton, Rockbank has brought Melton into play and firmly in focus as a growth centre, with affordability probably still being the key, and yet with very fast trains and better public transport and better freeway access, it's becoming very much what you'd term to be a standard suburb, a standard outer suburb.
Well, talking about infrastructure, there's the high-speed rail project that's currently in the planning stages. They're looking at developing a train line that extends, a high-speed train line that extends from the city through to potentially Sunshine and the airport. So that's going to obviously open up the area even more and bring more development and interest.
Oh, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
The more infrastructure that gets spent in an area, the better. And we
Yes.
can already see it. Places the likes of Balan, Bacchus Marsh.
Yes.
Bacchus Marsh has the benefit of being just outside the urban zone from a first home buyer's perspective. Instead of getting a $10,000 free kick from the government, you get 20. So that makes affordability the key. And locations such as Bacchus Marsh are kicking. And that extends through to Ballarat as decentralisation of government services becomes an increasing part of the world. Those places are also flourishing. So right through the district in which we build, which is Geelong, through the Point Cook corridor up through the outer west and north, they're all benefiting from all these sorts of things. And if the infrastructure that's been spoken about, very fast trains, access to the airport, those types of things, how can they not help?
Yeah, it's incredible. So in terms of what you're building, you've got a comprehensive range of plans on your website at newhomeshop.com.au. There's standard, duplex, single and double story options available. What are the things that first home buyers should be taking into consideration before deciding which type of home they should be building as their first home?
Yeah, it's a great question. And realistically, people starting off and looking for a first home, it seems very aspirational and you think you can have the hamburger with the lot.
Yes.
The astute first home buyer always recognises that they need to live a life as well. So don't borrow to your last penny.
Yes.
Plan to have a life as well as a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, over time, what used to be quarter-acre blocks are now reducing. Now we have blocks as small as 178 square metres, which is quite tiny. But what we try and do is to build and design homes that can fit on these increasingly smaller sized blocks. In most places around Melbourne now, the land is more expensive than the house you put on it.
Yep.
So affordability, the key to that is basically reducing the size of the land and then maximising the house that you put upon it.
Yes.
And we have our team of designers trying to be ahead of the curve in creating spaces for small families and beyond, living on those smaller blocks.
So for a first home buyer, what's the entry-level price point to get into, say, just a regular single-story home?
Okay, well, depending on the type of land you're looking at, land can cost anything. Mm-hmm. And in the areas that we deal with, which are quite varied, but a smaller block of land, you wouldn't be looking at under $200,000, which is remarkable value if you compare that to the east.
Absolutely.
But we can structure a very nice home on that would be suitable for first home buyers, and we can get away with a house for under $400,000.
That's house and land package together?
That's a house and land package.
Wow.
And it's becoming increasingly rare, obviously,
yes.
because the housing market has been so hot.
Yes.
And is continuing to grow in those outer suburbs.
Yes.
More so than the east, where it seems to have recently stagnated somewhat.
Yes.
But we've still got growth happening out there. But under $400,000, a first home buyer can comfortably get a house that would do them proud for a number of years.
That's remarkable, because given that the average price of a house in Melbourne now has risen to about $780,000, we're almost at, under the halfway point of that average price of a home. So I think it represents really good value.
We think so.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a first home buyer, what do you think is a reasonable budget for a couple just starting out and planning to have a family over the next few years? What sort of deposit would they need to get started as well?
It's fair to say that the financial institution and the industry as a whole has tightened up over recent times. It is now harder to accumulate a viable deposit to buy a house. So the deposit is the number one thing. And then it's all a question of affordability and being able to service the loan beyond that. Typically a house now, banks are looking for 20% deposit.
Yes.
That's not easy.
So on that 400,000 we were talking about before, pretty much an $80,000 deposit
Yes.
will be needed. Yeah,
and that's not a standard.
Not easy to come by.
Correct.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Yes.
And people have to plan.
Yes.
You can't wake up one day and just decide with no deposit that you want a house.
Yes.
And that you'll get one. So it's not the thing that our parents and grandparents just saw as a rite of passage anymore. Mm-hmm. It does take planning. In a lot of instances, more and more parents who have set themselves up are prepared to help out, to, shall I say, help out their children.
Yep.
Another way of putting it is to help themselves by getting rid of their children out of the house. And we see more and more of that assistance from earlier generations coming into play. But suffice to say, it's not an easy deposit to get.
Yes.
But if you're going to be in the housing market, that's what you need to achieve.
Yes, that's fair enough. Well, in terms of the investor market, let's have a look at that for a moment. Traditionally, those seeking to add to their property portfolios have been attracted to inner city apartments across Melbourne and the CBD. With the surrounding suburbs of Melbourne, there's been about 43 cranes installed of the 143 operating throughout the state, which indicates quite a high density of concentration of multi-level developments in the inner areas. So for investors looking to maximise their rental return and appreciating capital, are there any opportunities in the outer west, for example, for investment options? And why would that be an attractive option as opposed to going for a traditional 1 or 2 bedroom apartment in the inner city areas as a form of investment?
Absolutely. Look, the world has turned now with the likes of Airbnb.
Yes.
And there's some tangle around that in terms of leasing, etc. But the fact is that these new areas in which we operate have grown remarkably over recent years. That capital growth is the key to people's future. And what we as an organisation have tried to do is to develop an investment range. What does that mean? That means that we design them in such a way that we can build them easily and at a relatively lower cost. We try and build them with more accommodation spaces. So more bedrooms, which means that your rental return is likely to be higher than if you had a standard 1 or 2 bedroom home. The combination of those types of things on top of affordable land is something that represents a very, very good investment product. Mm. And we are increasingly finding ourselves with people who have been in the market in the last 10 years, have developed significant equity over being in that market during a growth period, and are now looking for investment homes. To buy a standard property may not have the investment potential as what we're saying is a low cost to build, high numbers of bedrooms in there. That's the sort of thing that maximises your rental return, your affordability, and consequently with those growth rates, an overall tax-effective, high-growth investment product.
And again, because we were talking about the popularity of the West and the way it's been expanding so rapidly, there's obviously going to be quite a high demand for both purchasing and rental in the area. So in terms of having the rent fulfilled and the opportunity to ensure that you're going to have a regular income stream coming from that property, it seems greater than the potential of having an apartment that's not leased for a few months in the CBD because of the tight competition there.
100%. So with the thousands and thousands of people that are arriving in Melbourne every year now, I read a statistic recently that said if everything just stopped now, if immigration was to stop today, that it would take beyond 5 years of building to catch up with the existing demand. Wow. So people are arriving in Melbourne, they need a place to stay.
Yes.
And typically what people do is rent before they buy. Mm-hmm. So the vacancy rate in the rental areas is down as low as we've seen it. And so long as immigration continues to go and the existing factors continue the way they are, then rental opportunities for investors should be very positive.
That's interesting. So despite the slightly negative outlook the media has been taking lately in relation to housing prices and demand, you see that the popularity of homes and the prices will continue to grow over the coming years?
Well, speaking of our patch,
Yes.
the numbers talk of averages, and they speak about Melbourne as a whole. I think you'll find that whilst the inner suburban high-priced properties, if we put it that way, have tended to come down somewhat.
Yes.
Because of this immigration into Melbourne, people tend to be landing in the outer suburbs because of the affordability factor,
Yep.
their cultural awareness, that's where their people are, and that is continuing to grow.
Yep.
So if we talk of a two-speed economy, if that's an analogy, then I think we can say that the rental situation in the outer areas is still quite buoyant.
Well, talking about the east and perhaps even further out to the southeast, land prices seem to be a little bit higher in this region when it comes to new home and land packages, for example. Is there a reason for the higher price point in terms of properties being, a very similar distance from the CBD, yet the prices in the southeast might be at least 30% higher? When a first home buyer is considering where they should be planting themselves and bringing up their family, what would be some factors that they would need to consider in helping them determine which is the right area to settle down in?
Sure. Let's go back. When I grew up, what you liked to think is that you could live immediately next door to your family.
Yes.
We tended to be a bit more geocentric back in the day. Time's moved on, and what we find is, due to cost as much as anything else, that's probably no longer possible. For people to get a start in their real estate portfolio, they probably need to look further afield. So the West, again, represents that opportunity. It is lower than the East for traditional reasons. That is, all the infrastructure is there in the East. People do tend to still want to be where they grew up, and most people come from the East. If they look across the bridge and care to take a bit of a drive, they'll find the affordability factor is very much there in the West, and as I mentioned before, closer to town.
Yep.
So that represents an opportunity for people to get into the real estate market at a greater level than if they were looking at, say, the same size house on the same size block in Melbourne's southeast.
Sure. And if we were to compare the ease of access into the city, for example, do you think it's easier to get across town from the west or the southeast or the east, for example? From my experience, I find that it's probably more congested now in the southeast going into the city, especially if you're going down the Monash. The major freeways seem to suffer from a lot more congestion. I think the Westgate Bridge obviously has its issues, but with the up-and-coming infrastructure, I know there's some planning and development for a Westgate tunnel in the coming 5 to 10 years. I'm not sure how far away that is, but that'll probably open up the roads a little bit more with the high-speed rail that they're planning. It seems like the West is really positioning itself for even greater growth and expansion.
Well, to be honest, John, I think that the whole of Melbourne is a little bit of an issue at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
You suffer it in the east on a daily basis. I suffer it in the west as well. But as you so rightly point out, there's infrastructure programs that have to untangle that mess.
Yeah.
I don't think it really matters where you are now. People talk about coming in from Doncaster.
Yeah.
And that's a dramatic trauma every day for people.
Yeah.
The whole of Melbourne is being addressed. The West is the fastest growing area in Australia at the moment. And obviously with that comes some political focus, and with that will come the infrastructure as well, as we've mentioned before about things the likes of the airport link and very fast trains and so forth. So yes, I wouldn't be saying that it's a dramatic improvement versus the East at the moment. It's probably not, in all honesty. But the planning, the potential, the goodwill, the government is there to hopefully improve that in all areas of Melbourne.
Sure, and really that indicates that not only as consideration as a place of residence, but for investment, if the infrastructure does follow suit and we are seeing those projects delivered, as suggested. Obviously, it indicates it's a really good area to be involved in right now in the early stages of this development.
Well, we certainly think it is. Our numbers would bear that out. We find that there is an enormous increase in those that are investing in our patch, and they're doing it for some reason.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the logic behind it, there is logic behind it. So we pray it continues, and we hope it continues for everyone's benefit.
Fantastic, Murray. Well, thanks for coming in today and devoting your time to this podcast, this being the first in the series of the Melbourne Property Pulse. We've covered a lot of ground today, so if you're interested in purchasing a new home or investment property, head over to newhomeshop.com.au to find out more. In the next few weeks, we'll be talking to John Richards, also from New Home Shop. He'll be coming in to talk to us about some knockdown and rebuild opportunities, which I'm really looking forward to. If you want to be notified of up-and-coming podcasts, feel free to subscribe to the channel. And also, if you'd like to suggest any content for future episodes, feel free to put your suggestions in the comments box below. Murray, once again, thanks for coming in. We'll see you soon.